name is Drew, and I'm the Aspiring Master, and welcome to the Aspiring Master Presents. This is a show where we talk about the meanings, misunderstandings, and insights about the important words we use and misuse on a daily basis. Really understanding what we're truly meaning when we talk allows us to convey and explain ourselves better to others. This not only allows us clearer communication so we can get what we need quicker and with less stress, but also helps us understand ourselves in more depth than we thought possible. On this show, we have our special guests, my wife Talia Wilson and friend Kim Robinson, who, like myself, are enthusiastic advocates for personal growth and cooperative awareness. Today, we're going to be talking about the word grief. So let's get to it. The definition of grief that comes up, that is basically what we're talking about, is deep and poignant distress caused by or as if by bereavement. And I think that that's a really good statement, but let's go to what bereft means, which is bereavement. So bereft is to deprive or robbed of a possession or use of something. So when you feel like you've been robbed of somebody's presence. So that's bereavement, bereft. So that kind of looks at that definition. So when we're talking about grief, of course, we can't not talk about the 5 stages of grief from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which are, and I'll just throw these out there right away, which is, well, zap and look, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So, and Talia's got those written down, so I'm just going to move that out of the way so that I can see your beautiful visages on my wonderful teleprompter right there. And and we can start talking about that. So, yeah, grief.
Grief.
There it is.
Good grief.
Good grief. Well, I think that even though you said that in kind of a tongue-in-cheek manner, I think that you are absolutely correct that grief is a good thing and an absolutely natural thing and something that we have to go through.
Yeah. And grief is more than losing a person or a pet, or you can grieve over a job. You can grieve over the loss of your home. You can grieve over a pet, obviously, right? Like there's
boyfriend, girlfriend, end of a
marriage
relationship.
splits, relationships. Like there's so many things you can grieve over.
And grief, I watched it was a TED Talk that somebody did on grief last night. And she was talking about, like the grief goes on, like you don't like just move past it. When you have that kind of loss, there's no move past it. She says you move with it, right? As a statement of it never quite goes away. I mean, it's no different than when I think about my first marriage. It never quite goes away. It's still a part of my life. It's still affecting my life. It's still all the things that happened there are still processing in my life, even though I was very sad at the end of it that I couldn't be or do the things that needed to happen to continue that relationship. And nothing against my wife here, right? Which I'm absolutely grateful for. It still affected me so profoundly that even though I've passed through a lot of the anger and all of that stuff, there's still some lingering stuff there. I don't think grief stops.
It's a defining moment for sure. Yeah. I think in your life. I lost my dad, and I was a sucky daddy's girl like my whole life at 19. And I was just talking to my girlfriend this morning about the difference between losing your parent at 19 as opposed to 50. Like you're in a completely different headspace, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it did define a lot of my life, losing him at that younger of age. It changed the way I look at things. It changed the way I look at life. It changed the drama like that you have when you're 19 of everything is dramatic. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't really matter when you lose somebody close to you like that. All of that stuff just kind of falls to the wayside because it's nothing compared to losing a loved one, right?
Right. It was like losing my my grandpa, my dad's dad, when I was 8 years old, and how gut-wrenching that felt. as a kid, because you just don't look at people as people. They're greater than that, when you're a child. And then losing my other grandpa, how old was I? I think at 31, so about hasn't quite been 10 years. And I hadn't seen him since I'd come to Canada, because I couldn't leave Canada during that time. And so kind of feeling guilty that I had missed the last few years with him and stuff. But at the same time, it didn't feel quite as overwhelmingly gut-wrenching as it did when I, losing my other grandpa. But at the same time, it still hurt. It hurt a lot, and he was the last one of his siblings to pass away. And so a lot of my mom's cousins were still going through the grief of losing their dads too. And one thing we all kind of came to agree with was the grief never really goes away. It just hurts less after a while. So
I think you just learn how to live without that presence in your life. And that takes for me or other people too. It just it's 34 years since my dad passed away. And I still have moments where I just break down and cry and miss him so much. And that's 34 years later. So I don't think the one saying that people always say is that, oh, time heals all wounds. And I disagree with that. I think you now have to learn how to live your life without that person in it. And for me, the best way to do that is to respect their memory, like by honoring them, right? And sort of carrying their legacy forward by talking about them and all the great things that they've taught you over your lifetime that they continue to teach even long after they're gone.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm coming at this from a unique perspective in my level, because I have, and Talia and I have discussed this a number of times, what I would consider an attachment disorder. Okay, and it is and it isn't. It actually benefits me in a bunch of ways, and it's a little bit more detrimental in other ways. So what happens is, for me, I'm able to get over things quicker because I don't equate them to me personally as much, right? They're not a necessary part of my life. Now, when I'm saying that, I'm saying, I'm going to give you an example. So we just lost one of our cats, as you know, in December. And Talia and I cried straight for pretty much 3 days. But after that 3 days, I was pretty much done, right? And even though every once in a while it comes up for me where I go, oh, I miss that huge meow when he gets at the door, right? It's like he was like meow, and you'd think he would be stopping, but it would just continue on for forever when I would come home. And he was all about me, all right. And just and the way that he'd rub and, so I have those memories. And so every once in a while I go, there's a gratitude that I had that, and just kind of a sad, I missed that. That would be so cool. But I don't have that hold on. Now, also to clarify, my mom, I was a latchkey kid. My sister and I both were. And my sister and I actually both have a very similar attachment disorder, where we will not attach as deeply as a lot of people, right? I'll still attach to people, and I still care about them, but I'm able to release them because my emotional dependence isn't upon them. And like I said, it was partly because I was a latchkey kid. My mom was rarely ever home. So my sister and I basically raised ourselves, and we didn't have a dad in the picture. Our dad sort of left when we were I was 6 or something. And so, there was just no attachments for me. And every time I tried to count on somebody, they would always let me down. And so I learned through that to just I'll just do it all myself, right? And I'll just rely on me. Well, my mom passed away before the cat did. And I remember turning to Talia. I said, geez, I really wish I felt for my mom what I did for my cat, right? Because I wasn't sad when she went away. Even though we had memories together, there weren't a lot, right? She wasn't involved in my life other than we worked together later on in life. She was an interior designer, and I worked with her and did interior design and carpentry work and stuff like that. So we became decent friends, but we never had that attachment. And so when that happened for me, it's just like there was no grief there. My sister goes, well, you might feel it later. And I said, like, I don't know if I will. And that saddens me. It makes me sad.
On the other side of it too was that Shelley had dementia, Alzheimer's, for a number of years. So at the same time, you're sad that she's gone, but at the other time, you're also feeling relief that she's not suffering anymore.
Right.
You know? I went through a little bit of that. My grandma died almost 2 years ago, and it's like, I miss her. It's still hard to picture that she's not there. And when I'm in Washington, I just can't pop in her back door and go say hi to her, But at the same time, she would never have wanted to be in the place where she was with the dementia. So as much as I miss her, part of me is still glad that she's not suffering anymore.
Yeah, and that's a big part of mourning as well. Like, you can mourn somebody while they're still alive. Like, my mom also passed away from cancer in 99. And when she was once they put her in palliative care, we knew this is not going to end well.
Yeah.
So I mourned her for 3 weeks that she was in palliative care, and she hung on, like, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't communicate. She was just a body laying in a bed that was still breathing. Like, it was crazy. And when she did finally pass away, I almost felt relieved. Like, and I know that may sound super mean, but it's not. It was like, oh, thank God she's not suffering anymore, and she's not in pain anymore, and she's free, right? Like, depending on what you believe in afterlife or faith or anything like that, I'm not super big on or know a lot about it, but I totally felt a sense of relief when she did finally pass away, whereas my dad was a heart attack, so it was sudden, it was quick, and it didn't give us time to prepare for the end. You know what I mean? And ultimately, you expect to lose elderly people. Like, it's the fact of life. It's natural, right? Like, the old elderly are going to die. What kills me is hearing about people losing their kids, right? Like, for whatever reason, and that is that's some serious.
Well, I've often talked to Talia had a relation of hers accidentally kill her adopted daughter. And that was like she thought the daughter was in the truck, but the daughter had decided to run around back the truck to go to the van door on the other side, right? She thought she'd got in, but she didn't, and she ran around the back, and of course she backed up, which is horrid when you think about it, right? Like, I mean, that's horrid.
It was awful.
And I turned to Talia and I said, oh my God, I don't even know how I don't know if I could live with myself in that situation, right? It's like knowing that my mistake had taken, right, and especially somebody close to me, and what kind of things that you would have to go through. I mean, just the amount of grief and mourning to be able to get to a place where you could feel okay with yourself in that situation. And, that's part of what we're talking about. That's a deep amount of grief, and to try and figure out, how would I deal with that? How would I deal with that? I mean, I would definitely go for counseling almost immediately if I possibly could. Because it hurts so bad.
Which brings me to one of the things I didn't know when I was going through losing my mom is how much support is actually out there. And I found out all of these things like long after she was gone. I ended up taking a grief counseling course because I thought, wow, I've lost like my mom, my dad, and a couple of friends of mine. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I can pay it forward by helping other people in the same kind of situation. So I took a grief counseling course at the place where my mom was in hospice. And it was funny at the end of it, I was like, okay, I could totally talk to families, like tell you lost somebody, like I can relate. I totally know what you're going through. And then they said, no, honey, it's not, you're not talking to the families, you're talking to the dying. And I was just like, whoa, what? Like, wait, but I don't know what it's like to die. Like, obviously I'm still here. So how do you, and I just backed away from it. And yeah, I still have that in the back of my head. Like, could I do it now? I don't know. There's like, I've sort of gotten involved with some death doulas, which I didn't even know existed, that totally help you through all the phases. But the bottom line with the death doulas is they show you how to appreciate life and do what you want to do now and make sure that it's a priority too. So they sort of help you with living. And then because you can have those difficult conversations about death that a lot of people do not want to have. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it until it's upon them. And then I feel like that's a big disservice because you've lived your whole life without knowing, like, and talking about and saying what you want to happen when you die. Like, do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? Do you want a service? Do you want whatever, right? Like, you don't get that opportunity.
Well, I'm going to throw us into a loop here, just a little bit.
Before you do that, I have a couple points I want to make. One, my mom's cousin, after the accident where she backed over her daughter, she channeled, I'm not going to say all because I don't know for sure, a great portion of her grief into mandating backup cameras on all vehicles. And they were able to get a law passed.
Wow.
And also on the older ones, if people want them installed, they can get them installed, because that was the problem. She didn't have a backup camera on her SUV, and that's why she hit Sydney. And now I've seen her quite a few times since, and she's pretty much back to being, happy-go-lucky and everything, and she can talk about Sydney without breaking down and stuff. And I'm sure that helped her out, being able to help other people,
Yeah.
And because I think she paired up with a couple other families that had the same type of thing happen.
Yeah.
So she definitely wasn't alone in what had happened. So, and the other point I wanted to make was something my dad brought up. My aunt, his oldest sister, had a heart attack and was in the hospital, and they did bypass, and afterwards she wasn't recovering as quickly as what they thought. Well, they did some more tests and found out she had advanced lung cancer, and she had to spend part of her time on the ventilator. And it was interesting because they hadn't spoken for years, and my cousin didn't even hesitate, called my parents and got my other aunts, the ones who would come, to be there, and all but one of them were there when she passed. And Dad's big thing since then, he's like, I don't care if I'm on a ventilator or what, I need closure. I need to be able to say goodbye when it's my time to go. And like, he got really sick last September, and they thought he was going into kidney failure. And, he was like, I went and saw him in the hospital, and he's like, yeah, I'm not leaving. I can't, die before my dog. My dog cannot. He didn't want Sasha to go through the grief of losing him. And it was just kind of, the minute I saw him, I knew he was going to be at least moderately okay. But it's still being able to dictate your own closure.
Yes.
I mean, that is huge.
Totally, right?
Yeah Because we all go different ways. We all have different feelings about the afterlife,
and it normalizes
what happens.
it.
Exactly.
It normalizes it. And that's the thing. I think we live in such a death denying culture. Well, I do.
We're not speaking for everybody. Yeah.
But yeah, you get that, right? Like you totally get to say, hey, like, everybody dies, plants die, people die, pets die, like everybody dies. So like, why can't we talk about it? Like,
Well,
I've never understood that. And I've always been
I've
one,
never understood it either.
yeah, to be able to talk about it, to say, hey, like, when, you know, how I want you to remember me is I want you to throw on Metallica, like,
right.
and I want you to rock out, and I want you to think of like all the concerts we went to together, like that.
Right.
I want like, that's how I want you to carry my legacy.
Yeah, my dad told me years ago he wanted a slideshow. He told me the 2 songs. I think I've since added one more that I know he likes, and do a slideshow and then have a kegger. You know, I don't want you guys sitting around crying over me. Just, you know, live it up, party, play the music I like or something. It's like, I can do that. You know,
Yeah. And
So-
celebrate the life that was lived, right?
exactly. You know, because I've been looking back ever since he had gotten sick last year. I have been looking back at the old photos and the stuff, and kind of looking back at both my parents, you know, and it's like,
Well,
but it gives you that opportunity to love them now. And like for my mom, we didn't talk about death at all. My dad raised me very psychology wise, and he knew he was going to die at a young age because heart disease runs in our family. So by the time I was 14, he would talk about, okay, Kimmy, I'm probably going to die before, you know, you get married and before you have kids of your own and all of this. And it used to drive me crazy because at 14, I'm like, well, what? Like,
yeah,
I'm not
I don't
even
wanna
out of
listen
high
to this.
school yet.
right.
And you're
What the
talking
hell?
about leaving? Like, no, right? So I would definitely push back and denial, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna listen to you. But all of those things that he said after he did pass away, I was like, oh, that's why you told me all this stuff. Oh, that's what you meant. And some of it didn't come out until, you know, 10, 15 years later. And I was like, oh, and then I'll remember a conversation that we had that he was trying to say, like, I don't want you to have, you lose having all those regrets. Like so many times that, you know, people don't want to talk about it. My mom never wanted to talk about it until she was in palliative care. And then we had no choice because we had to prepare, right? And then all of a sudden it was, oh, I wish I could have done this and I wish I could have done that. And it was all these regrets that came out for her. And that's why I think it's so important that we normalize it, you know, like, and make it's part of life. Like,
Well,
we need to talk about it.
I'm going to equate this to something because we're back at that point again. I said this is the same thing that we're dealing with sexuality and understanding it with our kids and understanding all of this stuff that goes on. So what happens is, and I think that this equates quite well to death and dying, is that we just don't talk about it. We're not educated about it. We're not educating our children about it. And then they go out into the world and then all of a sudden they experience this stuff. And when they experience it, it is such a hard blow to them that they get mixed up about death. Now, I'm sure that there's that religious people, they talk about death and it being a great experience, which seems to soften the blow a little bit. But when you're unfamiliar, when you're like me, my dad died of cancer, and my sister and I were down there looking after him in the last days, down in Arizona, and we got to experience firsthand what that level of pain looks like because he came home for about 4 days before he passed away, and we looked after him, and he was so glad to be home. But the truth is, it actually killed him faster than it would if he had stayed in the hospital. But that's neither here nor there. But dealing with that level of care that we had to do, like we were in trauma the whole time, right? We had to deal with something with a man, rather unfortunately, wasn't really part of our lives much, but that we would want to see healthy and happy, that we saw his deterioration. We saw how bad it was for him. We had to experience the pain that he was going through. And if we had been, you know, through school or at least in early adulthood, there was some mandatory courses that we went through, would have been great to be able to we at least know what to expect. And the same thing is the equation of sexuality. I mean, nobody tells us about it, and all of a sudden we're learning about it on the internet, and we're learning bad sexual habits. We're learning a whole bunch of this stuff that if we were open and willing to talk about it as we're growing up and be taught about it, like good sexuality, good understanding of how death is going to affect us and what's going on, all of those things that we keep quiet all the time are really, really hurting us later on. And I think that the grieving process, when we hit it, is way more hard hitting because we didn't talk about all of those things. I think that you're like the education that you're talking about, it hurts you far more when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. For sure.
Well,
but I'm coming from a different place though, right? Like I said, my dad was really, adamant on that. I knew that he was going to die at a young age. Obviously, I didn't think it was going to be as soon as it was. And all of his preparation, I don't think really I took correctly because I was too young to understand. Like,
right, of
I
course.
didn't even have my first major breakup yet, like when my dad passed away, right? I just had my very first boyfriend. I didn't even, I haven't even experienced that. So it was pretty much thrown into the fire, and here you go. Like, now you got to live your life without that person. Did you have a question for you though, Drew? Yeah. Like when you were spending time with your dad, like did you guys ever like bury any old hatchets like that because he wasn't around, or was it cathartic at any point, or forgiveness?
If we're talking at that point, I had already forgiven him a long time before that. I was in my early 20s when it happened. It was 23. When did Matt die?
95. You would have been 26.
26. Okay, so I was 26 years old, and it was about 22 to 23 that I was really working through some of the disappointments of him not being in my life and all of that stuff. And I came to the conclusion, I said, this is a person that made these choices based on what he thought was right for him, whether it's scared or what he knew or whatever, all of that stuff. And I was really cool. The thing that saddened me was while he was going through this, I certainly tried to talk deeply to him because I'm a deep talker. I just love deepness. I just think that that's the thing to do. And I wanted to understand him better, right? But unfortunately, he hid everything about himself. Looks were very important to him. And so I tried to steer conversations around to that stuff, but he just would not talk about anything personal. And I think that's the saddest thing for me, is that I didn't get to know the man. And the trials that he went through. I got some of that with my mom before that happened. We talked through a lot of the stuff that was going on through my childhood, some of her choices, her decisions, why she did certain things. So we were able to create an understanding and a good sharing on that level that I was not able to do with my dad. And it's rather unfortunate that there was no forgiveness necessary on my end, because I had already gone through all of the stuff and really accepted that this person was who he was. I just was more interested in trying to really get to know him and his reasons. And unfortunately, he was really resistant to that. So it's just like, well, it is as it is. And so the only sadness that I really had was that I didn't get to know that man, and embrace him a little bit more on an understanding level.
And I think that you hit the nail on the head as far as like, I didn't have like a horrible upbringing, and I didn't have a white picket fence, like middle class upbringing either. I was, and my mom ran away from home when she was 16, and she never looked back. I think I met my grandparents twice in my life, and cousins on that side of the family. And both times, well, the first time I was like 5. I barely remember it. But the second time I was 13, and they fought all the time, mostly over religion. But I think our parents only know they did the best they could based on what they were taught. So it goes back generations, right? And how we evolve, like as you get older. I think that was a big saving grace for me. I wasn't super close with my mom like I was with my dad. I could talk to my dad about anything, and as deep and emotional as I wanted to be, he was totally for it. Whereas my mom, not so much, right? Because my mom didn't have that experience growing up or with friends, even as an adult, like didn't have that total deep friendship or, you know, emotional way of being. Like she didn't have that growing up. She did the best she knew how based on what her parents did. And the fact that she ran away at 16 kind of like red flags me that it wasn't a good situation that she was in for her to run off and get the hell out of Dodge and move far away, right?
Well, I mean, I left home when I was 13, just at the tail end of 13. I left my family. My mom basically being a single mom, and my stepdad, who was and is actually, he only lives a few blocks from me now, but he was trying to. I mean, it was genuinely weird because he was in a polygamous relationship, which is a whole other show, by the way. So I had, and it's not the way that you talk about the sister wife thing that they do in Mormondom, right? It's like everybody's living in the same house. No, these were all sort of scattered throughout the city, and we didn't really have a ton of interaction between the families. So that was, which was fine by me because I thought it was just the weirdest thing in the world. So I ended up leaving because of some abuses that were going on that I couldn't deal with, and I ended up living with my grandparents from 14 to 17, and then moving back on my own after that. So it's quite an interesting story. It's one of those, welcome to Psychology 101. This is Drew's story. Okay, right? So I don't want to go into that too much, just to say that, my upbringing was a little bit more abusive. It was, I left home at 13, the tail end of 13, to go live with my grandparents for 2 or 3 years before I came back and was completely self-sufficient. I got myself a job. I got my, I had a place to rent. I shared it with my sister at the time. So it was, I was sort of completely disconnected from my family by about the end of 13, and connected in with my grandparents, who I loved greatly. And, just all of the stuff that ensued from that. So on a grieving level, like I said, when we were talking about grief and my mom, because I was so estranged from my family from a very early age, it was like I just didn't have the connection there to be as sad, right? Even when when I had decided to send my mom to a home, Talia and I were together, and I just went, yeah, it's time to. First off, we got all the diagnosis done. When it was time for her to do that, my sister actually said, no, send her down here. She lived in Colorado at the time, and send her down here, and I've got extra money, and we can deal with this, and we'll have her. And my mom lived with her for 2 years, which is insane because she was fairly far gone. She had early onset Alzheimer's, so at the age of 65, she wasn't really doing well. And Shannon got her down there and said, "Oh, I didn't realize she was this bad." And I said, "Well, that's just because you didn't. First off, you didn't understand what I was saying, and you didn't trust me. Oh, Drew's biased. He doesn't, he doesn't connect to anybody." Anyway, go ahead.
Part of the problem the family had was they would talk to Shelly for 15, 20 minutes on the phone, and she'd sound normal. That was about how long she could kind of hold everything together. So his uncle, his aunt, Shannon, none of them believed it was as bad as it was. And then his uncle came out right before we sent Shelly down to Colorado, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is not good." And it's like,
it's such a horrible disease. I can't even imagine. Like,
well, I'm gonna pull us back because we're talking about some good stories, which is great.
Yeah.
But we've sort of
Back
gotten off
to
the
grief.
we've gotten off the topic to
But I
grief
mean,
and
it
gone
is
it on to
part of
death. Of course it
Oh,
is.
it is. I mean, how
Absolutely
people are
part of it.
raised and how they, because everyone copies what they learn from their parents or some
or
form of
learns
it.
from it.
Yeah, or learns from it. I mean, that totally affects how everybody deals with grief. You know.
And you know, it's there is no dealing with grief. I think that there's a dealing with grief. And when you were talking about this is to talk to people that are dying, right? And how difficult that is, because remember that on our part, we feel that they're feeling all of this stuff, and that we feel that we need to be be familiar with it, right? Well, I haven't died yet. And so
Right.
how could I know what they're going through? Well, the truth is, if I go back in my mind and I just take a look at, you know, the things that I would be thinking is like, first off, I'm going to miss Talia, right? I'm really going to miss Talia. Secondly, I know I'm going to miss all of the experiences in this life that I'm having right now, right? I know all of these things. And so I'm heading towards a place that not only that, it's super scary, right?
Mm.
We all have to go and face that thing, and we're grieving for our life already. And I think that that's the thing, is they're trying to tell you that these people are in a deep state of grief because they know that this is coming, right? I mean, there's people
It's
that
your own
are
mortality, right? You need to face
exactly.
your own mortality. And a lot of people don't do that until death is upon them, and depending on how they die, right? Like
Mhm.
if it's a heart attack, you kind of don't know it's coming.
Well,
If
yeah,
it's like dementia or Alzheimer's or
yeah,
cancer, depending on the cancer, I guess, like
right.
it can be a slow and grueling,
Mhm.
where you have all that time to think about, your life and your accomplishments and, things that you regret.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it was like Therese when she found out she had lung cancer.
Right.
And one of the things because she'd talk about, before and after they would film a show, she'd kind of give them an update on how she's doing and her treatments and stuff. But I think she said at one point, I'm not afraid of death.
Mhm.
Mhm.
She had hit a place where she was, maybe not entirely ready to go, but she was at least comfortable with.
Or at peace with it.
At peace with it, yes, very
Well,
much so.
and while we're on the subject of when we're heading into death, and this is where a lot of people talk about faith in an afterlife and a lot of that stuff, and that does tend to alleviate you. It's like, oh, I'm going to continue on, although I won't be here. Now, I'm an agnostic, so I don't know what goes on. I hope that there's some stuff after, and I hope I get to go back to the 80s. I think that would be fun. Right? I really do. It's just like when I'm on my deathbed and I said, honey, I know that it's absolutely and utterly ridiculous, but I choose, just so that I can stop my brain from beating me up, I choose to believe that I'm going to die and, go back and re-experience my life in the 80s from the perspective I'm sitting in the back of my head going, oh, I did that? It's like, what am I doing that for? Oh, well, but I still like the music. So I said, this is a belief that I've made up completely out of whole cloth. That is, has no rhyme or reason, but it makes me feel better, so that I'm going to do it that way. Right. And
it's like trying to, it's the unknown, right? Like it's complete, even if you are religious and you believe that you're in God's hands when you pass away,
mm-hmm.
like there's still, no one's reporting back saying,
right.
oh, this is what it is. It's like awesome, so
like,
it's the unknown, and that triggers things.
Well, and here's another portion of that we have in grief, and it's like there's lots of people out there. They're going to argue one way or the other. We believe in reincarnation, or we believe, in a heavenly Father, or we believe that people come back and talk to us, or whatever, right? And I just go, I don't disagree with any of it. I mean, because I don't know, I have no clue, right? But is it working for you? Is what I have always inevitably asked. But it's also part of the grieving process. Remember that when we lose something, because grief happens when we feel that we lose something that we feel is really important to us. It could be somebody breaking into your house and stealing a vase that your mom gave you that means so much because the vase was a representation of the damaged relationship that you had with your mother that was healed partially by that gift. You know, you can grieve just as much for a missing vase or a broken vase, right? As you can for a dead sibling or a dead, husband or wife or like parent. You can, that the level of grief has nothing to do with the item itself, but how much emotional investment that you've placed upon the item. And so when we're talking about, belief systems and all of that stuff, they're just as important and they are just as invested on an emotional level for a lot of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
I totally agree.
it's nothing, there's nothing wrong with any of them, right? For me, I just go, to hold a belief to be able to get you to feel better about the fact that we are mortal and that we may be going to a better place so that we can relax while we're on that part of our deathbed. Is there is nothing, absolutely nothing incorrect or wrong about those statements. Whether I agree or I disagree, whatever, doesn't bug me at all.
Everybody grieves differently. Like everyone is on their own path. There's no like set way. Like even in the 5 stages that we talked about earlier, like you could go from denial to bargaining, back to denial to right into depression and skip anger altogether. Like, or you can just live in anger depending on the situation. There is no map. There's no right way or wrong way to grieve.
No. Like anybody that's been in the grief field will tell you that they don't always happen that way. And sometimes you skip steps and sometimes you're stuck on a step forever. And and here's another thing that people, I think, don't understand about how grieving works. I think that everybody has this idea that we're all similar, right? And that we all behave similarly, that we all have the backgrounds that are similar. Like, I mean, the truth is, if that was the case, I would be hard rocking out with you at a Metallica concert, right? And the truth is, I'm not, because one, I think Metallica's music is okay, but it's not like the basis of my life, right? But I know people that it is, because it represents all of those things, the feelings and the emotions that they have towards those music, it defined who they were. And when you take that emotional standpoint about somebody's music, you can go, oh yeah, well I totally get that. But here's the thing, is because we are so different, living in the same city, living in maybe even under the same belief system, whatever, we're still so different that our chemical makeup is completely different. I promise you that people with brain disorders, mild or major, depending, chemical disorders that we have in our bodies that affect our thinking, our feeling, our understanding, the way we attach to things, is all so completely different. Like Talia reacts to grief way different than I do. And my heart sings for her because I know that it hurts. I felt that hurt and I know that it hurts for her. And I know that because of my upbringing, because of the way that I function, I don't feel as much of that hurt, but I at least can identify with it and be there. Right?
Back to backgrounds a little bit. I grew up going to church every Sunday, or pretty much every Sunday, with my mom, and the church she grew up in was the church my grandparents went to, and Dad never went with us. And I pretty much know for a fact that it's because he had a stroke when he was 21. He had to basically look death in the face, and so he never begrudged anyone who went to church or anything like that. He just would say it wasn't for him. Why do I need to go to a building, when I could go out in the woods, like when he used to go hunting and see the most beautiful countryside and just feel, you know, I guess one with the earth.
Yeah, appreciation. Right?
Yeah, yeah. So, like, for example, he had an aunt. It was my great aunt who was very religious, went to church. When any of us had any medical issues, like when I had my knee surgery, she used to put me in the prayer group or prayer chain at her church, you know, and she'd ask, and it's like, hey, good vibes are good vibes. I don't care what
Exactly.
kind of energy it is, but she never, ever looked down on other people for what they did with their lives. Then the greatest example of that was she was over at our house one time, and my dad used to get Playboy, and she read everything, like literally everything. So she went to pick up a magazine and didn't realize what she grabbed, and she just puts it down and goes, "I don't think that's for me." But that was it. No judgment.
Wow.
She loved unconditionally.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
imagine living your life without judging. Like, it's so, I catch myself all the time.
Right.
And I mean, social media is like crazy for
Right.
passing judgment without actually understanding that person. But wow, that's
Yeah.
impressive. That's
And not
super.
to say she didn't get angry and she didn't have her frustrations and she didn't say, I just don't understand why these people act that way,
Yes.
you know.
Yes, I
But
see.
she loved everybody genuinely.
Well,
And it was incredible. I mean, she was more of a,
It's like, there's our humanity. Like, I lose faith in the inhumanity every time I open like Facebook or Twitter. I'm just like, oh my God.
yeah.
But that
I
is
know.
humanity. It's like, I don't care who you are. If you're broke down on the side of the road or you're hurt, like, I'm gonna stop and help you. Like,
Yeah.
and it has nothing to do with me or my religion or anything, right? Like, it's
Right.
humanity.
Well, and because she loved everybody so unconditionally, to a point, she was like more of a grandmother to me than my dad's mom, you know, because she didn't play favorites and
Right.
she loved everybody. And so I remember after she died, my cousin Jeff was lamenting that, well, he went down to one birthday card that he got, which was from his parents, you know, because he didn't get birthday cards from his other aunts, and neither did I, not usually. And but he always got one from Aunt Jessie, and that was the thing. She never forgot anybody's birthday. So that was kind of hard when she died, because it's like she used to spell my name and she'd write in this really, you know, scribbly scrawl and stuff. But it was just the cutest thing. She'd get the cutest cards and stuff, and it's like, yeah, you end up.
I talk about when you honor people too, because what I learned after the death of my dad, and it took me a few years to figure this out, was that time of year, like that traumatic experience, like, and it could be any trauma, the anniversary will come up and you're not thinking about it. Like, you're thinking about it, but you're not really thinking about it. And all of a sudden you just feel like, I felt like crap for like the week before and for a month after, and I would gain weight and I would go into this weird depression, and I never knew why until I connected the dots and went, oh, this is when dad passed away. So I've got all this residual stuff in my mind that so I need to honor him. And so I think I was like 25, and the anniversary of his death would come up again. And because he died on the island here and I was living on the mainland, me and my girlfriend would come over and we'd go, let's go honor my dad. And we would go to the place where we scattered his ashes. And then we would come into Victoria and we just do scenic stuff that I knew my dad would have wanted to do with us. And it honored him. And then those feelings faded away. Like, I knew, and I still honor him every day, just like you did, Talia, with your aunt. It's like, talk about, wow, like, she was so awesome. She never forgot birthdays. She always, you know, even if she spelled my name wrong, like, and you gotta embrace that stuff, right? Like,
I think that what you've hit on something really quite nice is one of the best ways to move through grief is get to a place of gratitude, which is
right?
what I think that we're talking about right now, and being grateful that they were part of your life. Now,
Exactly.
you have to go through the anger, you have to go through the depression, and in some levels, right? Like, I mean, it's not the same for everybody, but you go there at least a little bit. And like you said, that your realization that all of a sudden I realized, well, the reason that I was doing that, connect the dots, is because I still hadn't dealt with my grief. I still was unforgiving for some reason, whether that's because he left too soon, life, I'm pissed off at life. I don't like the way that this works, whatever that was, that depression of, well, this person's not here anymore. When you get to a point of being able to forgive the death, the leaving of somebody, I think that's when we get to that sort of acceptance level. But I think that we get to a place of understanding and gratitude for having had that person in our lives and being grateful for all of the things we did get. And I think that gratitude really does banish a lot of that. Like you're saying, right?
I feel like losing my dad at 19, which isn't terrible. I mean, I was just barely an adult, and I know people that lost their dads way earlier or lost someone close to them.
Again, I'm gonna interrupt you because a lot of the times we compare our pain to somebody else's pain, and the truth is, and I wanted to bring this up earlier, and it sort of we went places
sideways
no, it wasn't sideways. It was just because we want to complete a thought before we start another thought. But I remember somebody talking about, I was taking a course, and it was a personal growth course, and we were in there, and part of one of the round things were that there was like 20 people there, and we would talk about some issue that was really up for us. And there was a lady that was talking about her cat that she lost like 11 years before. And she was sobbing and just huge amounts of grief. That cat was so incredibly important in her life that she had never gotten past the grieving process. And part of what we were doing was allowing some of that stuff up so that we could help it out. And I remember somebody talking, I don't know whether they were talking to me or talking to somebody else, but they said, oh yeah, and it's like, like you lost a cat, hello, right? And me trying to explain that to somebody, I said, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a vase, whether it's a cat, whether it's the amount of emotional importance to your life, what kind of emotional support they were in your life, and how much you placed with them, whether it's a cat or an inanimate object. I said, it's just as important. You may have lost your husband, and you cannot compare the grief to somebody that lost their cat. You can't look down and contemptually go, well, you lost a cat, that's less important than my husband, right? And it's just like, you do not know that. Let's understand that grieving is a personal experience, and it is just as suffering. The suffering that you do can be just as huge as somebody losing, say a sibling or their daughter. It could be just as huge losing that vase or losing that cat. And I think that we so often compare, and I'm going to throw my wife under the bus here, because I did last video. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
What the hell? Don't worry, I got you.
She's got your back. She's gonna come back at me on this. But when Talia and I first got together, I would go, oh yeah, my back is really hurting, or anything like that, and she says, oh, you know nothing about pain. I've had these surgeries, right? And I mean, she doesn't do it anymore, right? She understands now that you can't compare pains.
No,
because
no, not at all.
When you're experiencing it, it's horrible, right? It's just.
I think I sort of. I say stuff like that just to be more inclusive to that I acknowledge that other people, it's not just us, right? It's not just about me. It's about.
Well, absolutely. But when you brought it up, I think that it's something important to share, that we understand and accept that everybody's pain, no matter what they're going through, whether it's a bad breakup, whether it's losing their cat, whether it's losing their sock, I mean, who knows, right? But it is just as much of a suffering on a personal level as it is with somebody losing something what they would consider to be worse.